The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Veterans Affairs office in downtown Portland. Sarah Martinez adjusted her military jacket one last time before walking through the glass doors. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of discipline and service. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her brown eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences most people her age would never understand. She had been coming to this office for 3 months now, trying to get the help she desperately needed. The nightmares hadn't stopped since she returned home. The flashbacks came at the worst times, in the middle of grocery shopping, during job interviews, even while trying to sleep. The doctor said it was PTSD, but getting treatment through the VA system was like navigating a maze with no exit. "Next," called the clerk behind the bulletproof glass. Sarah stepped forward, her military ID and discharge papers in hand. The same routine, the same questions, the same bureaucratic runaround. She had served her country with honor, completed missions that she could never talk about, and saved lives in places that officially didn't exist on any map. But here, in this sterile government building, she was just another number in an endless system. "Sarah Martinez," she said, sliding her documents through the slot. The clerk, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, barely glanced at her papers. "What can I do for you today? I'm still waiting for approval for my therapy sessions. It's been 3 months since I filed the initial paperwork. My psychologist says I need intensive treatment, but I can't afford it without VA approval." The clerk typed something into his computer, his fingers moving slowly across the keyboard. "I see your file here. Says you were in the Navy." "Yes, sir. 5 years of service." "And what was your job classification?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. This was always the difficult part. Her actual service record was classified so far above this clerk's pay grade that even mentioning it could cause problems. "Special operations," she said simply. The clerk's eyebrows raised slightly. "Special operations? Like what exactly?" "I can't discuss the details. My service record should show the clearance level required." The man squinted at his screen, then looked back at Sarah with suspicion. "It says here you were a Navy SEAL." "That's correct." A woman in line behind Sarah snorted with laughter. "Yeah, right. Women can't be SEALs." Sarah turned around to face the woman, a middle-aged veteran with graying hair and multiple unit patches on her jacket. "Excuse me? You heard me, honey. Women weren't allowed in SEAL teams. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but stolen valor is a serious crime." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Stolen valor. She had heard those accusations before, from people who didn't understand that some military operations were so classified that they existed in the shadows, beyond public knowledge or official recognition. The truth was, she had been part of an experimental program that few people knew existed. "Ma'am, I assure you that my service record is accurate," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. The woman stepped closer, her voice rising. "I've been around the military for 20 years, sweetheart. I know what I'm talking about. The SEALs didn't start accepting women until 2016, and even then, none have made it through the program. So either you're confused about what unit you were in, or you're lying." Other people in the waiting area began to take notice. Conversations stopped, and heads turned toward the growing confrontation. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came before a panic attack. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the voices too loud. "Listen," Sarah said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "I understand your skepticism, but I'm not lying about my service. If you could just know." "You listen," the woman interrupted. "I'm calling the police. Stolen valor is a federal crime, and I'm sick of people like you taking advantage of benefits that real veterans earned." The clerk behind the glass was now paying full attention, his phone already in his hand. "Should I call security?" he asked the confrontational woman. "Call the cops," she replied. "This girl needs to learn that you can't fake military service." Sarah's heart began to race. This was spiraling out of control fast. She had been in dangerous situations before, faced enemy fire and life-threatening missions, but this felt different. This was personal. These people were attacking not just her story, but her very identity. "Please," Sarah said, raising her hands in a peaceful gesture. "I can explain everything if you'll just give me a chance." But it was too late. The woman had already pulled out her own phone and was making a call. Within minutes, Sarah could hear sirens in the distance. Two police officers entered the VA office, their uniforms crisp and their expressions serious. The taller of the two, Officer Rodriguez, approached Sarah while his partner, Officer Thompson, spoke with the woman who had made the complaint. "Ma'am, we received a report that you're impersonating a military service member. Is that correct?" Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. "No, officer. I'm not impersonating anyone. I am a veteran. I served 5 years in the Navy." Officer Rodriguez looked at her discharge papers, then back at her. "These documents say you were a Navy SEAL. The complaint suggests that's impossible." "It's not impossible. It's classified." The officer exchanged glances with his partner. Sarah could see the skepticism in their eyes, the same look she had been getting for months whenever she tried to explain her service record. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us to the station. We need to sort this out properly." Sarah's mind raced. She knew that once they started digging into her background, they would hit classified walls that even the police couldn't penetrate. Her commanding officers had warned her that this might happen, that her service existed in a gray area that the public and even most government officials would never understand. "Officer, I understand your position, but I'm telling you the truth. My service record is legitimate, even if it's not something that can be easily verified through normal channels." "That's what they all say," the woman who had started this whole mess called out from across the room. "Every stolen valor case has some excuse about classified missions." Officer Thompson finished taking the woman's statement and walked over to his partner. They spoke in low voices for a moment before turning back to Sarah. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for suspected stolen valor, which is a federal offense under the Stolen Valor Act. You have the right to remain silent." As the officer read her rights, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had survived enemy fire, completed impossible missions, and saved lives in the darkest corners of the world. She could survive this too, even if it meant her secret would finally come to light. The handcuffs were cold against her wrists as they led her out of the VA office. The woman who had started the confrontation watched with satisfaction, convinced that she had caught a fraud. Other veterans in the waiting room shook their heads in disgust, thinking they had witnessed another case of someone trying to steal the honor that rightfully belonged to those who had truly served. But Sarah knew something they didn't. Hidden beneath her shirt, covered by the conservative clothing she wore to avoid attention, was a tattoo that told a different story. It was small, intricate, and known to only a select few people in the entire world. The tattoo was more than just ink on skin. It was proof of membership in a unit so secret that its very existence was denied by official channels. As the police car pulled away from the VA office, Sarah closed her eyes and thought about the men and women she had served with. They were scattered across the globe now, living quiet lives under assumed identities, their service records buried so deep that even they sometimes wondered if it had all been real. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years protecting her country's secrets, and now those same secrets were making her look like a liar. The very classification that protected national security was destroying her credibility as a veteran seeking help. At the police station, they processed her like any other suspect. Fingerprints, photographs, personal belongings cataloged and stored. Through it all, Sarah remained calm and cooperative. She had been trained to handle interrogation, to maintain her composure under pressure. This was just another test, another challenge to overcome. The holding cell was small and bare, with concrete walls and a steel bench. Sarah sat quietly, her mind drifting back to the missions that had defined her military career. The first time she had parachuted into enemy territory. The rescue operation that had saved 12 hostages. The intelligence-gathering mission that had prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. None of it officially existed. Her unit's operations were so sensitive that they operated outside the normal military structure. They reported directly to a small group of senior officers who had the clearance to know about their activities. To the rest of the world, including most of the military, they were ghosts. Hours passed in the holding cell. Sarah could hear the sounds of the police station through the walls. Phones ringing, conversations between officers, the occasional shout from another suspect being processed. She wondered how long it would take for her case to reach someone with the authority to verify her story. The problem was that her commanding officers were bound by the same secrecy that protected the unit's operations. They couldn't simply call the local police and vouch for her without potentially compromising ongoing missions. The bureaucratic maze that protected national secrets was now working against her. As evening approached, Sarah was transferred to the county jail to await a hearing. The intake process was humiliating but familiar. She had been through worse during her military training. Strip searches, medical examinations, and assignment to a cell with 3 other women who eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "What are you in for?" asked her cellmate, a woman in her 40s with tattoos covering her arms. "They think I'm lying about my military service," Sarah replied honestly. The woman laughed. "Stolen valor? That's a new one. Most people in here are smart enough not to claim they're war heroes." Sarah didn't respond. She knew that anything she said could be used against her later, and she had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the best defense. She lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how her life had led to this moment. Growing up in a military family, Sarah had always known she would serve. Her father had been a Marine, her grandfather a Navy pilot in World War II. Service wasn't just a career choice in her family. It was a calling, a responsibility to something greater than oneself. She had excelled in everything she tried. High school valedictorian, college scholarship recipient, outstanding marks in officer candidate school. When the opportunity came to try out for the Experimental Special Operations Program, she hadn't hesitated. The training was brutal, designed to break even the strongest candidates. But Sarah had survived, thrived even, proving that she belonged among the elite few who could handle the program's demands. The missions that followed were the stuff of nightmares and action movies. Infiltrating terrorist cells, rescuing kidnapped civilians, gathering intelligence in hostile territories. Each operation was a chess game played with real lives, where one wrong move could mean death for her team or innocent civilians. But it was also the most meaningful work she had ever done. Every successful mission meant lives saved, attacks prevented, families reunited. The secrecy was frustrating, knowing that she could never talk about the things she had accomplished, never receive public recognition for her service. But the work itself was reward enough. Until it wasn't. The mission that ended her military career had started like any other. Intelligence suggested that a terrorist cell was planning an attack on a civilian target. Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating the group and gathering enough evidence to prevent the attack without revealing their presence. Everything went wrong from the start. Their cover was blown within hours of insertion. What should have been a covert intelligence gathering operation turned into a running firefight through the streets of a foreign city. Civilians were caught in the crossfire, and Sarah had to make split-second decisions that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In the end, they succeeded in stopping the attack, but at a cost that nobody had anticipated. 3 members of Sarah's team were killed, and she herself was wounded both physically and emotionally. The classified nature of the mission meant that the fallen soldiers couldn't be publicly honored, their families told only that they had died in a training accident. Sarah's injuries were primarily psychological. The physical wounds healed, but the guilt and trauma lingered. She began having panic attacks during missions, second-guessing decisions that had once come as naturally as breathing. Her commanding officers recognized that she needed help, but the classified nature of her work made traditional therapy impossible. When her enlistment ended, Sarah was given an honorable discharge and a carefully crafted service record that concealed the true nature of her work. On paper, she looked like any other Navy veteran with a background in special operations. The details that would prove her SEAL training were locked away in classified files that most government officials couldn't access. She had hoped that the transition to civilian life would be easier than it was proving to be. The nightmares followed her home, and the isolation of carrying secrets that she could never share took its toll. The VA was her best hope for getting the help she needed, but the very secrecy that had protected her during her service was now preventing her from getting treatment. Now, lying in a jail cell, accused of stolen valor, Sarah wondered if the price of her service had been worth it. She had given everything to her country, her youth, her health, her peace of mind. In return, she had received experiences that she could never talk about and scars that no one could see. Tomorrow, she would appear before a judge who would decide whether she was a decorated veteran deserving of help or a fraud deserving of punishment. The irony was bitter. The same classification system that had once made her invisible to enemies was now making her invisible to the very people who were supposed to help veterans like her. But Sarah had one thing that her accusers didn't know about. Hidden beneath her clothing, barely visible even to those looking for it, was a small tattoo that marked her as a member of one of the most elite units in the American military. It was a symbol known to only a handful of people in the entire world, and if the right person saw it, it would change everything. The question was whether that person would ever get the chance to see it before it was too late. Detective Marcus Williams had seen his share of stolen valor cases over the years. Usually, they were straightforward, someone wearing military decorations they hadn't earned, claiming service they had never performed, or trying to scam benefits meant for real veterans. But as he sat in his office reviewing Sarah Martinez's file, something felt different about this case. The woman in custody had been calm during booking, almost eerily so. Most people facing federal charges were either angry, scared, or trying to talk their way out of trouble. Sarah had simply answered questions politely and requested to make her phone call. There was something about her demeanor that reminded Marcus of the military personnel he had worked with during his own brief stint in the Army Reserve. Marcus pulled up Sarah's discharge papers on his computer. On the surface, they looked legitimate. The formatting was correct, the signatures appeared genuine, and the dates aligned with her story. According to the documents, she had served 5 years in the Navy with a specialty in special operations and had received an honorable discharge 3 months ago. The problem was the classification level. Most of Sarah's service record was redacted or marked with clearance levels that Marcus had never seen before. He had handled classified materials during his reserve service, but this was beyond anything he had encountered. The few details that were visible suggested assignments to units that didn't appear in any official Navy organizational charts. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Detective Williams, this is Agent Jennifer Hayes from the FBI. I understand you have someone in custody for a stolen valor case involving Navy SEAL impersonation. Marcus was surprised. Federal cases usually took days or weeks to reach FBI attention, not hours. Yes, we do. Sarah Martinez. How did you hear about this so quickly? Her name flagged in our system when you ran her fingerprints. I need to come down and speak with her immediately. This case may be more complicated than it appears. Something in the agent's tone made Marcus uneasy. What kind of complications are we talking about? I can't discuss that over the phone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone. In 15 years as a detective, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him that Sarah Martinez was not the typical stolen valor case he had initially thought. While waiting for Agent Hayes to arrive, Marcus decided to dig deeper into the complaint that had started this whole situation. The woman who had accused Sarah, Linda Morrison, was a Navy veteran herself with 22 years of service. Her record was impressive. She had served as a logistics coordinator on multiple deployments and had earned several commendations for her work. Linda's complaint was detailed and passionate. She had written 3 pages describing her encounter with Sarah at the VA office, expressing her outrage at what she saw as a clear case of stolen valor. The key point of her argument was that women had only recently been allowed to attempt SEAL training, and None had successfully completed the program as of her last knowledge. Marcus called Linda to get more details about the confrontation. She answered on the second ring, her voice still angry from the morning's events. "I'm telling you, Detective, that girl is a fraud. I've been around the Navy long enough to know who belongs and who doesn't. Women weren't even allowed to try out for SEAL training until 2016, and the first woman to even attempt the full program didn't start until 2017. This Martinez girl claims she served 5 years and got out 3 months ago. The math doesn't add up. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate your service and your concern for protecting the integrity of military honors. But is it possible that there are aspects of special operations that you might not be aware of?" Linda's voice became sharp. "Detective, I spent 2 decades in the Navy. I may not have been special operations myself, but I knew people who were. The SEAL community is small and tight-knit. If there were women serving in those units, I would have heard about it." Marcus made notes as she spoke, but something was bothering him. Linda seemed absolutely certain about her facts, but Sarah had been equally confident in her story. One of them was wrong, but which one? "Mrs. Morrison, did Sarah show any identification or documentation of her service?" "She had military ID and discharge papers, but those can be faked. Hell, you could buy that stuff online these days. What she didn't have was the bearing, the knowledge, the little things that you can't fake if you've really been there." "What do you mean by bearing?" "It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't served. Real special operations people carry themselves differently. They're alert, controlled, confident in a specific way. This girl seemed nervous, almost like she was scared of being caught." Marcus found that interesting. In his experience, nervous behavior during a confrontation didn't necessarily indicate guilt. Sometimes it indicated someone who was telling the truth, but knew they wouldn't be believed. Agent Hayes arrived exactly 20 minutes after her call, just as she had promised. She was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she didn't waste time on small talk. Marcus met her in the lobby and escorted her to his office. "Detective Williams, thank you for calling this to our attention so quickly. This case involves some sensitive national security issues that I can't fully discuss, but I need to interview your suspect immediately." "Agent Hayes, I have to ask, is Sarah Martinez actually a veteran or not?" The FBI agent paused, choosing her words carefully. "That's what I'm here to determine. Her name appears in some classified databases, but the nature of those entries is unusual. I need to verify some details before I can give you a definitive answer." They walked to the interview room, where Sarah had been waiting for several hours. Through the one-way glass, Marcus could see her sitting calmly at the metal table, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired but alert, occasionally glancing at the mirror as if she knew she was being watched. "She's been cooperative," Marcus told Agent Hayes. "No demands for a lawyer, no attempts to change her story. Just keeps insisting that her service record is legitimate but classified." Agent Hayes nodded. "That's consistent with certain types of military service that we encounter from time to time. Let me speak with her alone first, then I'll bring you in if necessary." Marcus watched through the one-way glass as Agent Hayes entered the interview room. Sarah looked up, and for just a moment, Marcus saw something change in her expression. Not fear or guilt, but recognition. It was subtle, but it suggested that Sarah knew what kind of agent she was dealing with. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Agent Hayes with the FBI. I understand you're facing charges related to stolen valor." "Yes, ma'am. Though I maintain that the charges are based on a misunderstanding of my actual service record." Agent Hayes sat down across from Sarah and opened a file folder. "Your name appears in some databases that most people don't have access to. I need you to help me understand what kind of service you performed that would result in such classification." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. "Agent Hayes, you understand that there are certain oaths I took regarding classified information. Even in this situation, I'm not sure how much I can say without potentially compromising ongoing operations." "I understand. But right now, you're facing federal charges that could result in significant prison time." Sometimes the only way to prove your innocence is to trust the system to handle classified information appropriately. Marcus watched Sarah carefully consider her options. Whatever internal debate she was having, it seemed to involve weighing risks that he couldn't understand. Finally, she spoke. My unit was designated as Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Task Force Blue. We operated under joint command between Navy Special Operations and CIA Special Activities Division. Our missions involved deep cover infiltration of hostile organizations for intelligence gathering and direct action operations. Agent Hayes wrote something in her file, then looked back at Sarah. Task Force Blue was decommissioned in 2019 following a security breach. If you served with that unit, you would have been transferred to another assignment. Yes, ma'am. I was reassigned to Special Activities Division under non-official cover until my discharge 3 months ago. Marcus couldn't follow all the military jargon, but he could see that Agent Hayes was taking Sarah's answer seriously. The FBI agent was making notes and asking follow-up questions that suggested she had knowledge of the unit Sarah was describing. Ms. Martinez, you understand that what you are describing is a level of classification that very few people have clearance to verify. If you're lying about this, it will only make your situation worse. I understand, Agent Hayes, but I'm not lying. I can provide you with contact information from my former commanding officers, though I suspect they won't be able to confirm details over normal communication channels. Agent Hayes closed her file and stood up. I need to make some calls. Detective Williams, can I speak with you privately? They left Sarah in the interview room and returned to Marcus's office. The FBI agent immediately pulled out her phone and dialed a number that appeared to be memorized. This is Agent Hayes, badge number 2847. I need immediate clearance verification for a subject claiming service with Task Force Blue and SAD. Subject name is Sarah Elena Martinez. Navy service 2018 to 2024. Yes, I'll hold. Marcus listened as Agent Hayes was apparently transferred several times to different departments. The conversation involved a lot of number codes and abbreviations that meant nothing to him, but the agent's expression grew increasingly serious. Understood. I need a senior official with clearance to verify specific details. Tomorrow morning is not acceptable. This subject is currently facing federal charges. I see. Yes, please expedite that. She hung up and turned to Marcus. Detective, this case is now beyond local jurisdiction. I'm going to need to take custody of Ms. Martinez pending verification of her service record. You're telling me she might actually be legitimate? I'm telling you that her story is checking out at levels that most stolen valor cases never reach. The people I just spoke with know who she is, but confirming the details of her service is going to require clearance levels that even I don't have. Marcus felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. So what happens now? Now we wait. I've requested that a senior official from the Pentagon come to verify Ms. Martinez's service record in person. Until then, she remains in federal custody. What about the woman who made the complaint? Linda Morrison seems absolutely certain that Sarah is lying. Agent Hayes considered this. Mrs. Morrison is probably telling the truth about what she knows. The problem is that special operations units like the one Ms. Martinez claims to have served with are so classified that even other military personnel aren't aware of their existence. It's entirely possible for both women to be telling the truth as they understand it. That evening, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the case. He had gone home to his apartment, but sleep wasn't coming easily. Something about Sarah's calm demeanor had stuck with him. He had interviewed hundreds of suspects over the years, and he had developed a sense for when someone was lying. Sarah didn't give off any of the typical signs of deception. He decided to do some additional research. Using his police department's access to federal databases, he looked up more information about Task Force Blue and the other units Sarah had mentioned. Most of the results were heavily redacted, but he found references to joint military CIA operations that matched her description. The more he read, the more complex the picture became. There were congressional oversight reports mentioning special operations units that operated outside normal military structure. There were budget line items for programs that weren't described in detail. There were casualty reports that mentioned deaths during training exercises in locations where no training was supposed to be taking place. It painted a picture of a shadow military operating in the spaces between official acknowledgement and deniable operations. If such units existed, their members would face exactly the kind of problem Sarah was experiencing: legitimate service that couldn't be officially verified. Marcus also looked into Linda Morrison's background more thoroughly. Her service record was exactly as she had described: 22 years as a logistics coordinator with an exemplary record. She had the kind of career that would give her extensive knowledge of regular Navy operations, but probably very little exposure to the most classified special operations units. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work to find Agent Hayes already waiting in his office. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. "Any word from Washington?" he asked. "Admiral Richardson is flying in this afternoon. He has the clearance level necessary to verify Ms. Martinez's service record. Until then, she stays in federal custody." "Admiral Richardson? That sounds pretty high level for a stolen valor case." Agent Hayes nodded grimly. "Detective, I think we need to prepare for the possibility that we've arrested a legitimate war hero. If Ms. Martinez's service record is authentic, this case is going to become a public relations nightmare for everyone involved." Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down heavily in his chair. 24 hours ago, this had seemed like a straightforward case. Now it was looking like a complex web of classified operations, national security implications, and bureaucratic complications that was way above his pay grade. "Agent Hayes, what happens if she's legitimate? Does she have grounds for false arrest? Let's worry about that after we know for sure what we're dealing with. Right now, my priority is making sure that if Ms. Martinez is who she claims to be, we handle this properly and with the respect that her service would deserve." As they spoke, Sarah remained in federal custody, waiting for someone with the authority to verify her story. She knew that Admiral Richardson was one of the few people who could confirm her service without compromising ongoing operations. The question was whether he would arrive before the situation spiraled completely out of control. In her cell, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. She had spent years protecting secrets that could never be shared, completed missions that would never be acknowledged, and serve her country in ways that most people would never understand. Now, ironically, those same secrets were threatening to destroy her. But she had one thing that gave her hope. The tattoo hidden beneath her shirt was more than just ink. It was a promise. A promise that her brothers and sisters in arms would never abandon her, that her service would never be forgotten by those who mattered, and that the truth would eventually come to light. Tomorrow, when Admiral Richardson arrived, she would finally have a chance to prove that her honor was not stolen, but earned through blood, sacrifice, and dedication to something greater than herself. Admiral James Richardson stepped off the military transport at Portland International Airport at exactly 1,400 hours. At 58 years old, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had spent 4 decades in naval service, rising through the ranks from enlisted sailor to flag officer. His weathered face and steel-gray eyes had seen conflicts across 3 continents, but today's mission was unlike any he had undertaken before. The drive to the federal building took 30 minutes through Portland traffic. Admiral Richardson used the time to review the classified file in his briefcase one more time. The documents inside were marked with classification levels that existed above top secret, in a realm of special access programs that even most senior military officers would never see. Sarah Elena Martinez had been one of his most promising officers. Her file read like something from a spy novel: successful deep cover missions, multiple lives saved, terrorist attacks prevented. But it also documented the psychological toll that such service extracted from even the strongest individuals. The experimental program that Sarah had been part of was officially designated as Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Task Force Blue, but those who serve in it simply called it the unit. It had been created in response to the changing nature of global threats, designed to place highly trained operatives in situations where traditional military forces couldn't operate effectively. The program had been controversial from the beginning, placing military personnel in deep cover roles traditionally handled by CIA operatives blurred the lines between military and intelligence operations. The legal and ethical implications were complex, but the results had been undeniably effective. Sarah had been recruited for the program during her second year of Navy service. Her psychological profile indicated an unusual combination of traits: the physical and mental toughness required for special operations, combined with the adaptability and language skills needed for intelligence work. She had scored in the top percentile on every assessment. The training had been brutal, even by special operations standards. It combined traditional SEAL training with advanced intelligence techniques, cultural immersion, and psychological conditioning. Of the 60 personnel who started the program, only 12 had completed it successfully. Sarah had finished second in her class. Her first mission had been a 6-month infiltration of a human trafficking network operating between Mexico and the United States. Working under a completely fabricated identity, she had gathered intelligence that led to the rescue of over 200 victims and the arrest of 37 criminals. The operation had been so successful that it remained classified to protect the methods used. Subsequent missions had taken her to Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. Each operation had required her to become someone else entirely: an arms dealer, a journalist, a refugee, a businesswoman. The psychological strain of constantly shifting identities was something that traditional military training couldn't fully prepare someone for. Admiral Richardson remembered the debriefing after Sarah's final mission. She had successfully prevented a terrorist attack on a civilian target, but the cost had been significant. 3 of her team members had been killed, and Sarah herself had been forced to take actions that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The mission was classified as a success, but everyone involved knew that something fundamental had broken. Now, sitting in the back of a government sedan, Admiral Richardson reflected on the ironies of the situation. Sarah had served her country with distinction in operations that had saved countless American lives. She had sacrificed her mental health, her sense of identity, and her future for missions that could never be publicly acknowledged. And now she was being accused of stolen valor by people who had no idea what she had actually accomplished. At the federal building, Agent Hayes met Admiral Richardson in the lobby. She had been briefed on the Admiral's arrival, but not on the specific details of his relationship to the case. "Admiral Richardson, thank you for coming so quickly. Ms. Martinez has been in custody for 36 hours now, and we need to resolve this situation as soon as possible. Agent Hayes, before we proceed, I need to understand exactly what Ms. Martinez has told you about her service. The nature of her actual assignments makes this situation extremely delicate." They walked toward the elevator as Agent Hayes summarized the previous day's interviews. She claimed service with Task Force Blue and subsequent assignment to CIA Special Activities Division. She's been consistent in her story and has provided what appear to be legitimate contact information for her commanding officers. Has she mentioned any specific operations or missions? No, sir. She's been careful to stay within bounds of what she considers appropriate to discuss, even under these circumstances. That level of operational security discipline is actually one of the things that made me take her claim seriously. Admiral Richardson nodded approvingly. Even facing federal charges, Sarah was maintaining the security protocols that had been drilled into her during training. It was exactly what he would expect from someone who had actually served in the unit. They arrived at the interview room where Sarah had been waiting. Through the one-way glass, Admiral Richardson could see her sitting calmly at the metal table. She looked tired and older than he remembered, but she maintained the alert posture that had made her such an effective operative. "I'd like to speak with her alone first," Admiral Richardson told Agent Hayes. "What I'm about to discuss with Ms. Martinez involves classification levels that require special handling." Agent Hayes nodded and gestured toward the interview room. "I'll be observing from next door." Please let me know if you need anything. Admiral Richardson entered the room and closed the door behind him. Sarah looked up, and for the first time since her arrest, genuine emotion showed on her face. She started to stand, but he gestured for her to remain seated. "Hello, Sarah. It's been a while." Admiral Richardson. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the relief underneath. "I wasn't sure if anyone would come. Of course someone would come. You think we abandoned our own?" He sat down across from her and studied her face. The bright, eager young officer he remembered was still there, but she carried new lines around her eyes and a wariness that spoke of hard-earned experience. "Sarah, I need you to tell me what happened yesterday. How did you end up being arrested for stolen valor?" Sarah recounted the confrontation at the VA office, the accusations from Linda Morrison, and her subsequent arrest. As she spoke, Admiral Richardson made notes and asked clarifying questions. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "This is exactly what we were afraid would happen when we designed the cover stories for unit personnel. The classification level required to protect ongoing operations means that even legitimate verification requests get buried in bureaucracy. Admiral, I've been trying to get help through the VA for 3 months. The PTSD from my last mission is getting worse, but every time I try to explain my service record, people think I'm lying." Admiral Richardson's expression softened. He had seen too many good people broken by the psychological demands of special operations. The nature of Sarah's missions had made traditional military mental health support impossible. How do you get therapy for experiences that officially never happened? "Sarah, I want you to know that your service has been exceptional. The operations you completed saved American lives, prevented attacks on our homeland, and protected national security interests that most people will never know about. What you did mattered, even if it can never be publicly acknowledged." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes for the first time since her arrest. "Admiral, sometimes I wonder if any of it was real. The missions, the unit, even my own identity. When people look at me and say women can't be SEALs, part of me starts to believe them. It was real, Sarah. Every mission, every sacrifice, every moment of courage. The fact that it's classified doesn't make it less real or less important." Admiral Richardson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder marked with multiple classification stamps. "I brought your complete service record. Not the sanitized version that the VA has access to, but the real one. Every mission, every commendation, every sacrifice you made for your country." Sarah looked at the folder like it was a lifeline. For months, she had begun to question her own memories, wondering if the isolation and secrecy had somehow distorted her perception of her service. Seeing the official record validated everything she had experienced. "There's something else," Admiral Richardson said. "Something that will prove your service beyond any doubt, even to skeptics who don't have security clearance." He gestured toward her left shoulder. "May I see your tattoo?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then pulled down the collar of her shirt to reveal a small, intricate design just below her collarbone. The tattoo was barely an inch across, a stylized anchor surrounded by 13 stars, with a small trident intertwined through the design. Admiral Richardson nodded with satisfaction. "Task Force Blue Memorial Tattoo. Only members of the unit have that exact design. The 13 stars represent the 13 unit members who were killed in action during the program's existence. The trident represents the SEAL heritage that formed the foundation of our training." "Yes, sir. I got it after my teammate Marcus died in Syria. It seemed like the only way to honor what we had all been through together." "Sarah, that tattoo is more than just a memorial. It's proof of membership in a unit so classified that fewer than 50 people in the entire government know it existed. The design was created specifically to be recognizable to those who need to know, while remaining meaningless to anyone else." Admiral Richardson stood up and walked toward the door. "I'm going to bring Agent Hayes and Detective Williams in now. It's time to clear up this misunderstanding and get you the help you deserve." He opened the door and gestured for the 2 law enforcement officers to enter. Agent Hayes and Detective Williams took seats at the table while Admiral Richardson remained standing. Agent Hayes, Detective Williams, I can definitively confirm that Ms. Martinez is a legitimate Navy veteran who served with distinction in highly classified special operations units. Her service record is classified at levels above your clearance, but I can provide enough details to satisfy your investigation. Detective Williams looked skeptical. Admiral, with all due respect, Mrs. Morrison, who made the complaint, has 22 years of Navy service herself. She seems absolutely certain that women weren't serving in SEAL units during the time frame in question. Detective, Mrs. Morrison is correct about the regular Navy SEAL program. Women were not accepted into standard SEAL training during most of Ms. Martinez's service period. However, Task Force Blue was not a standard SEAL unit. It was an experimental program that operated outside normal Navy special operations structure. Admiral Richardson pulled out a document from his folder. This is a congressional notification, properly classified, that authorizes the experimental integration of female personnel into special operations units for intelligence purposes. Ms. Martinez was one of 12 women selected for this program out of over 500 candidates. Agent Hayes examined the document carefully. The congressional letterhead and classification markings appeared authentic, and the level of detail suggested this was not something that could be easily fabricated. Admiral, why wasn't this program more widely known, even within the military community? Agent Hayes, the nature of the missions required complete compartmentalization. Traditional special operations units operate with the knowledge that their existence is acknowledged, even if their specific missions are classified. Task Force Blue members operated under deep cover in situations where any connection to the U.S. military could compromise ongoing intelligence operations. He turned to Sarah. Ms. Martinez, would you please show these officers your memorial tattoo? Sarah again pulled down her collar to reveal the small design. Admiral Richardson pointed to specific elements of the tattoo as he explained their significance. This design exists in no public database. No military manual, no tattoo catalog. It was created specifically for Task Force Blue members as a way to identify each other if traditional identification methods were compromised. The exact design, including the placement of the stars and the angle of the trident, is known only to unit members and a handful of senior officials. Detective Williams leaned forward to examine the tattoo more closely. The detail was incredible, far beyond what someone could have copied from a picture or description. The stars were positioned in a specific pattern, and the trident was integrated into the design in a way that looked both intentional and meaningful. How many people have this tattoo? Detective Williams asked. Fewer than 40 people in the world, Admiral Richardson replied. 12 women and 26 men who completed the program successfully. 7 others who died during training or missions and received the tattoo posthumously as part of their memorial services. Agent Hayes was taking detailed notes. Admiral, what kind of verification can you provide for our official report? I can provide a limited service summary that confirms Ms. Martinez's naval service, her assignment to special operations units, and her honorable discharge. The specific details of her missions will remain classified, but the summary will be sufficient to demonstrate that she is a legitimate veteran deserving of appropriate support and benefits. Sarah had been quiet during this exchange, still processing the fact that her service was finally being acknowledged by someone with the authority to make it official. The relief was overwhelming, but she also felt a deep sadness for all the months she had struggled alone with her trauma and isolation. Admiral, she said softly, what happens now? Even if these charges are dropped, I still need help dealing with the psychological effects of my service. The VA's system isn't equipped to handle cases like mine. Admiral Richardson's expression grew serious. Sarah, that's something we've been working on since the unit was disbanded. There are now specialized programs for personnel who served in highly classified operations. The treatment is provided through military channels rather than the VA, with therapists who have the security clearance necessary to discuss your experiences. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. Dr. Catherine Wells at Walter Reed has been working with former Task Force Blue members for the past 2 years. She understands the unique challenges that deep cover operatives face when transitioning to civilian life. Detective Williams cleared his throat. Admiral, what about Mrs. Morrison, the woman who made the complaint? She was genuinely trying to protect veterans' benefits from fraud. This situation wasn't her fault. Detective, Mrs. Morrison acted from honorable motives based on the information available to her. The classification of Ms. Martinez's service made this kind of misunderstanding inevitable. No one is at fault here, except perhaps a system that makes it difficult for legitimate veterans to get the help they need. Admiral Richardson gathered his papers and stood up. Agent Hayes, I trust this resolves the federal case against Ms. Martinez? Yes, sir. I'll file the appropriate paperwork to have all charges dropped immediately. Ms. Martinez, you're free to go. Sarah stood up slowly, still somewhat stunned by the rapid turn of events. 24 hours ago, she had been facing federal prison time for stolen valor. Now she was being validated by one of the highest-ranking officers in the Navy and offered access to specialized treatment programs. Admiral, thank you for coming. I know this wasn't easy to arrange. Sarah, you serve your country with honor and distinction. Making sure you get the recognition and help you deserve is the least we can do. Your service may have been classified, but it was never forgotten by those who matter. As they prepared to leave the interview room, Detective Williams had one final question. Ms. Martinez, I have to ask, what made you choose such a difficult path? Most people would never willingly take on the kind of missions you described. Sarah considered the question for a moment before answering. Detective, I grew up believing that service to country was the highest calling a person could have. My father served, my grandfather served, and I wanted to continue that tradition. When I was offered the chance to serve in a way that could make a real difference, even if it meant sacrificing personal recognition, I couldn't say no. She paused, looking directly at Detective Williams. The missions I completed saved lives. American lives, civilian lives, innocent people who will never know how close they came to danger. If keeping that secret was the price of protecting them, it was a price worth paying. Admiral Richardson nodded approvingly. That attitude is exactly why Task Force Blue was so successful and why personnel like MS Martinez are so valuable to our national security. As they walked out of the federal building together, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that had been there for months. Her service was finally acknowledged, her story finally believed, and her sacrifice finally recognized by someone who understood what it had cost her. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken a crisis and the intervention of an admiral to get her the help she should have received months ago. But sometimes, she reflected, the truth takes time to surface, and vindication comes from unexpected sources. The small tattoo beneath her shirt had indeed proven to be authentic, not just as a mark of service, but as a symbol of the bonds forged by those who serve in the shadows, protecting freedoms that most people take for granted. It was proof that honor earned in secret is still honor, and that sacrifice made without recognition is still sacrifice. Now, finally, she could begin the process of healing from wounds that had been invisible to everyone except those who had earned the right to understand them. 3 weeks after Admiral Richardson's visit, Sarah Martinez sat in the waiting room of the Warrior Recovery Center at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The building was modern and welcoming, with large windows that let in natural light and artwork created by veteran patients and therapy programs. It was a far cry from the sterile bureaucracy of the VA office where her troubles had begun. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. The federal charges had been formally dropped, and Detective Williams had personally delivered the paperwork to ensure there were no lingering issues. Agent Hayes had filed a comprehensive report that sealed Sarah's case file and flagged her name in federal databases to prevent future misunderstandings about her service record. The media attention had been unexpected and overwhelming. Somehow, word had leaked about a decorated female Navy SEAL being arrested for stolen valor, and reporters had descended on the story like wolves. Admiral Richardson's office had issued a carefully worded statement confirming Sarah's legitimate service without revealing classified details. But The damage to her privacy was done. Sarah had given one interview to a veterans advocacy group, hoping to highlight the challenges that personnel with classified service records faced when seeking help. She had kept the details vague, but the response from other veterans had been remarkable. Dozens of people had reached out, sharing similar stories of struggling to get benefits or recognition for service that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Dr. Catherine Wells entered the waiting room and approached Sarah with a warm smile. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of calm presence that immediately put people at ease. Her office walls were covered with certificates and commendations, but also with thank you letters from patients and photos from military charity events she had organized. "Sarah, it's good to finally meet you in person. Admiral Richardson has told me a great deal about your service. I understand you've been having some challenges since your discharge." They walked to Dr. Wells' office, which was designed to feel more like a comfortable living room than a clinical treatment space. Soft chairs, warm lighting, and a coffee table with books about veteran issues and recovery stories created an atmosphere that encouraged open conversation. "Dr. Wells, I have to admit, I'm not sure where to start. The arrest and everything that followed has actually helped in some ways. At least now people believe my story. But the underlying issues that brought me to the VA in the first place haven't gone away." Dr. Wells opened a file folder and reviewed some notes. "I've been working with former Task Force Blue members for 2 years now, and I've seen some common patterns in how you've all been affected by your service. The combination of extended, deep cover operations and the isolation of carrying classified experiences creates unique psychological challenges." She looked directly at Sarah with understanding eyes. "The nightmares, the flashbacks, the feeling of disconnection from civilian life. These are normal responses to abnormal situations. What you experienced during your missions was traumatic, but you've also been dealing with the additional stress of not being able to talk about it with anyone who could understand." Sarah felt a profound relief at hearing her experiences validated by someone who actually understood them. "Dr. Wells, sometimes I feel like I'm losing my sense of who I really am. I spent so many years being other people, playing roles, and maintaining cover identities that I'm not sure where Sarah Martinez ends and the operative personas begin. That's a very common challenge for deep cover personnel. When your survival depends on becoming someone else so completely that you convince trained intelligence officers, it's natural for those false identities to leave psychological residue. We call it identity fragmentation, and it's something we can work on together." Dr. Wells pulled out a treatment plan and showed it to Sarah. "I want to start with weekly sessions focused on integration therapy, helping you reclaim and strengthen your core identity while processing the traumatic experiences you've carried alone for so long. We'll also work on some practical skills for managing the triggers that bring on your flashbacks and panic attacks." Over the following months, Sarah threw herself into the therapy process with the same intensity she had brought to her military service. The sessions with Dr. Wells were challenging, but illuminating, helping her understand how her mind had protected itself during the most difficult missions by compartmentalizing experiences and emotions. She learned that the hypervigilance that had kept her alive in hostile territories was now making normal civilian interactions feel threatening. The constant awareness of exits and potential dangers that had been essential skills for an operative were now preventing her from relaxing in safe environments. Dr. Wells also introduced her to other former Task Force Blue members who were at different stages of their recovery. Sarah met James, a former teammate who had struggled with alcohol abuse after his discharge, but was now 2 years sober and working as instructor at a civilian security company. She met Maria, who had left the unit 3 years earlier and was now pursuing a master's degree in international relations. The group sessions were particularly powerful. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah was able to talk openly about her experiences with people who truly understood them. She could describe the psychological pressure of maintaining a cover identity for months at a time without having to explain what that felt like. She could discuss the guilt of surviving missions where teammates didn't without worrying about revealing classified information. The hardest part, Sarah shared during one group session, is feeling like my service doesn't count because no one knows about it. When people thank me for my military service, I feel like a fraud because they're thanking me for something they think I did, not for what I actually did. James nodded knowingly. I struggled with that for years. It felt like we were ghosts. Our service was real, our sacrifices were real, but we couldn't claim credit for any of it. It wasn't until I started working with Dr. Wells that I realized the classification doesn't diminish the value of what we did. Maria added her perspective. I think we need to find meaning in the fact that our service protected people who will never know they were in danger. That's actually more pure than service that gets recognition. We did it because it was right, not because anyone would thank us for it. These conversations helped Sarah begin to rebuild her sense of pride in her service. The mission she had completed had prevented terrorist attacks, rescued hostages, and gathered intelligence that had saved countless lives. The secrecy that had initially felt like a burden began to feel like a badge of honor, proof that she had served at the highest levels of her profession. 6 months into her treatment, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. Linda Morrison, the veteran who had accused her of stolen valor, had tracked down her contact information and wanted to meet in person. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near the VA office where their confrontation had begun. Sarah was nervous about the encounter, unsure how to handle face-to-face meeting with the woman who had caused her arrest. But Dr. Wells had encouraged her to view it as an opportunity for closure and understanding. Linda arrived exactly on time, looking somewhat apprehensive but determined. She was a woman in her early 50s with short gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in military service. Her clothing was neat and conservative, and she carried herself with the discipline that never fully leaves career military personnel. Sarah, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I owe you an enormous apology. They sat down at a quiet table in the corner of the coffee shop. Linda looked uncomfortable, but resolute as she began to speak. After Admiral Richardson's statement was released to the media, I did a lot of soul-searching about what happened between us. I realized that my knowledge of military operations, while extensive, was limited to the parts of the Navy that I had access to. I never considered that there might be units operating at classification levels that I wasn't aware of. Sarah studied Linda's face, looking for signs of insincerity, but finding only genuine remorse. Mrs. Morrison, I understand why you reacted the way you did. From your perspective, my claims didn't match what you knew to be true about military service. You were protecting something you believed in. That's generous of you to say, but it doesn't excuse what I did. I had you arrested based on my assumptions, without giving you a fair chance to explain your situation. I've been a veterans advocate for years, and I ended up attacking a veteran who needed support, not accusation. Linda pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. I've been doing research since the charges against you were dropped. I found articles about the challenges that personnel with classified service records face when seeking benefits or recognition. I had no idea that this was a widespread problem affecting hundreds of veterans. She opened the folder and showed Sarah several printed articles and studies. There are veterans from CIA operations, Special Forces missions, and classified military programs who face the same credibility challenges you experienced. The very security measures that protect national interests make it difficult for these veterans to get help when they need it. Sarah was surprised by the depth of Linda's research. The folder contained academic papers, government reports, and advocacy documents that painted a comprehensive picture of the issues facing veterans with classified service records. Mrs. Morrison, I appreciate you taking the time to educate yourself about these issues. It means a lot that you cared enough to learn more. Linda's expression grew more serious. Sarah, I want to ask your forgiveness, but I also want to do something more concrete to make amends. I've been volunteering with veterans advocacy groups for 15 years. I want to use that experience to help other veterans who might face similar challenges to what you went through. She pulled out a business plan from the folder. I'm proposing to create a support network specifically for veterans with classified service records, a place where they can get help navigating the VA system connect with therapists who have appropriate security clearance, and find community with others who understand their unique challenges. Sarah read through the proposal with growing amazement. Linda had thought through every aspect of the program: funding sources, staffing requirements, partnerships with existing veterans organizations, and outreach strategies to reach veterans who might be suffering in isolation. This is incredible work, Mrs. Morrison. You've identified gaps in the support system that I didn't even realize existed. I want to name it the Task Force Blue Foundation in honor of your unit and others like it. But only if you're comfortable with that. I know the classification issues are complex. Sarah was moved by the gesture. The idea of turning her painful experience into a resource that could help other veterans felt like a way to find meaning in the trauma she had endured. I think that would be wonderful. And please call me Sarah. I think we've moved past the need for formalities. Over the following hour, they discussed the practical details of the foundation. Linda had already contacted several veterans organizations and found enthusiasm for addressing the needs of personnel with classified service records. She had also reached out to Dr. Wells and other therapists who specialized in treating veterans with unique psychological challenges. Sarah, I want to ask you to consider being involved with the foundation if you're interested. Your experience and perspective would be invaluable in designing programs that actually meet the needs of veterans like yourself. Sarah was intrigued, but cautious. I'm still in therapy myself, trying to work through my own issues. I'm not sure I'm ready to take on helping others yet. I understand completely. The offer stands whenever you feel ready. In the meantime, I'd appreciate your input on the program design and your suggestions for reaching veterans who might benefit from these services. As they prepare to leave the coffee shop, Linda had one final thing to say. Sarah, I want you to know that meeting you has changed how I think about military service and the sacrifices that some veterans make. Your willingness to serve without recognition, to carry classified burdens alone, and to forgive someone who wronged you shows a level of character that I deeply admire. Sarah was touched by Linda's words. Mrs. Morrison, Linda, I think what you're doing now shows tremendous character as well. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, and even more courage to try to make things right. They shook hands outside the coffee shop, and Sarah watched Linda drive away with a sense of wonder at how completely their relationship had transformed. The woman who had been her accuser had become an advocate, and the crisis that had seemed like a disaster had become the catalyst for positive change. That evening, Sarah called Dr. Wells to tell her about the meeting. Her therapist was pleased, but not surprised by the outcome. Sarah, one of the signs that you're healing from your trauma is that you're able to see beyond your own pain to understand other people's perspectives. The fact that you could forgive Linda and even work with her shows how much progress you've made. Dr. Wells, I've been thinking about what Linda said about getting involved with the foundation. Part of me wants to help other veterans who might be going through what I experienced, but part of me is afraid that I'm not ready for that kind of responsibility. That's a very healthy self-awareness. What do you think you need to feel ready to take on that kind of work? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think I need to feel more confident in my own recovery first. I still have difficult days, times when the nightmares come back or when I feel disconnected from civilian life. I want to be stable enough to support others before I take on their problems too. That's very wise. Recovery isn't a destination, it's an ongoing process. But there's no reason you can't start small, maybe offering input on program design or sharing your story when you feel comfortable doing so. You don't have to commit to anything more than you're ready for. Over the next year, Sarah gradually increased her involvement with the Task Force Blue Foundation. She started by reviewing proposals and offering suggestions based on her experience navigating the VA system. She participated in focus groups with other veterans to identify the most critical support needs. As her confidence grew, she began speaking at veterans events about the challenges facing personnel with classified service records. Her story resonated with audiences who had never considered the unique difficulties that some veterans faced when seeking help. The foundation grew rapidly, attracting support from veterans organizations, military charities, and government officials who recognized the need for specialized services. Within 18 months, they had established partnerships with 3 major medical centers to provide therapy services for veterans with classified backgrounds. Sarah's role in the foundation became a source of healing for her own trauma. Helping other veterans gave meaning to her difficult experiences and provided a sense of purpose that had been missing since her discharge. She found that sharing her story within appropriate boundaries helped her process her own emotions while inspiring others to seek help. 2 years after her arrest, Sarah stood before a congressional subcommittee on Veterans Affairs, testifying about the need for improved services for personnel with classified service records. The room was packed with veterans, advocates, and media representatives. "Honorable members of the committee," Sarah began, "I appear before you today not as a victim, but as a veteran who has found purpose in adversity. The challenges I faced in getting recognition and support for my service led to the creation of programs that have now helped hundreds of other veterans." She looked around the room, making eye contact with the committee members. "The classification systems that protect our national security should never prevent veterans from getting the help they've earned through their service. We can maintain operational security while still providing appropriate care and recognition for those who serve in the shadows." Sarah's testimony was covered extensively in the media and helped build momentum for legislative reforms to improve services for veterans with classified backgrounds. The bill that emerged from the committee included funding for specialized treatment programs and streamlined processes for verifying service without compromising security. After the hearing, Admiral Richardson approached Sarah in the hallway outside the committee room. "Sarah, I'm proud of how you've turned a difficult situation into positive change for veterans. This is exactly the kind of leadership we hope to see from Task Force Blue alumni. Admiral, I've learned that our service doesn't end when we take off the uniform. Finding ways to continue serving, even in civilian life, has been essential to my recovery." They walked together toward the exit, and Admiral Richardson shared some news that Sarah hadn't expected. The Pentagon has decided to declassify some basic information about Task Force Blue's existence and mission. Not operational details, but enough to allow veterans like yourself to discuss your service more openly. Sarah stopped walking and stared at him in amazement. "Are you serious? After all these years of secrecy?" The threat environment has changed, and some of the intelligence methods that require classification are no longer in use. More importantly, we've recognized that the psychological health of our veterans is worth the minor security risks involved in acknowledgement. This news meant that Sarah and her fellow Task Force Blue veterans would finally be able to talk about their service with family members, therapists without security clearance, and the general public. It wouldn't solve all the challenges they faced, but it would eliminate the isolation that had made their recovery so difficult. That evening, Sarah called her parents for the first time in 2 years. She had maintained minimal contact with them since her discharge, unable to explain why she was struggling without revealing classified information about her service. "Mom, it's Sarah. I have some things to tell you about what I've been going through since I left the Navy." The conversation lasted 3 hours. Sarah was finally able to explain her arrest, her therapy, her work with the foundation, and the true nature of her military service. Her parents were shocked, proud, and heartbroken all at the same time, shocked by what she had endured, proud of her service and recovery, and heartbroken that she had carried such burdens alone. "Sweetheart," her mother said through tears, "I wish you could have told us sooner. We could have helped you, supported you through the difficult times. Mom, I couldn't risk compromising operations that were still ongoing. But now I can, and I want you both to be part of my life again." The call ended with plans for her parents to visit the following month and meet Dr. Wells, Linda, and the other people who had become Sarah's support network. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah felt truly connected to her family and hopeful about her future. 5 years after her arrest, Sarah Martinez stood in her office at the Task Force Blue Foundation, looking out the window at the bustling street below. The foundation now operated in 12 cities across the country, providing services to over 800 veterans with classified service backgrounds. Her assistant knocked on the door and entered with a folder of testimonials from veterans who had been helped by the foundation's programs. Sarah read through them regularly, drawing inspiration from stories of recovery and healing. One letter was from a former CIA operative who had struggled with depression and substance abuse for a decade before finding the foundation. Another was from a Special Forces medic who had been homeless for 3 years before getting connected with appropriate mental health services. Each story represented a life transformed and a veteran who had found hope again. Sarah's own recovery had continued steadily. The nightmares had become infrequent, and she had developed effective coping strategies for managing stress and anxiety. She had even started dating someone, a fellow veteran who worked for a military contractor and understood the unique challenges of transitioning from classified service to civilian life. The small tattoo below her collarbone had indeed proven to be authentic, not just as proof of her service, but as a symbol of resilience and the bonds formed by shared sacrifice. It reminded her daily that honor earned in secret was still honor, and that service to others was the highest calling regardless of recognition. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was Dr. Wells with news about a new veteran who needed help, a former Task Force Blue member who had just been arrested for stolen valor in Atlanta. Sarah smiled grimly and reached for her keys. Some things never changed, but now there was a support system in place to handle them. "I'll be on the next flight to Atlanta," she told Dr. Wells. "Let's make sure this veteran doesn't have to go through what I did alone." As she left her office, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had changed from that morning 5 years ago when she had walked into a VA office seeking help. The arrest that had seemed like a disaster had become the catalyst for the most meaningful work of her life. She had learned that authenticity wasn't just about proving the truth of her service. It was about finding the courage to be vulnerable, to ask for help, and to transform personal pain into purpose that served others. The tattoo that had saved her from false accusations had become a symbol of something much larger: the unbreakable bonds between those who serve in the shadows and the responsibility to care for each other long after the mission's end.